In the dusty streets of a forgotten American town, where dreams seem as fragile as the desert wind, an extraordinary love story unfolds that will restore your faith in human connection. This isn't just another romance. It's a testament to how one moment of pure recognition can transform two broken souls and inspire an entire community. Picture this. A young soldier, scarred by battles both seen and unseen, walking through a town where nobody knows his name. His heart carries wounds deeper than any physical injury, and his eyes reflect the weight of memories he wishes he could forget. Then, in the most unexpected moment, a deaf girl sees something in him that he had forgotten existed. Hope. With nothing but her finger in the dust and an artist's soul, she creates something that will change both their lives forever. What starts as a simple drawing becomes the foundation for a love story so powerful that it moves not just two hearts, but an entire brotherhood of warriors who understand the true meaning of honor and sacrifice. This is a story about seeing beyond disabilities, beyond scars, beyond the labels society places on us. It's about finding home in the most unexpected places and discovering that sometimes the most profound conversations happen without words. If this story already has you captivated, please hit that like button. Leave a comment sharing what draws you to stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that will touch your heart. Now, let's dive into Chapter 1. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Copper Ridge, a town that time seemed to have forgotten somewhere between the interstate and nowhere. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen walked these empty streets like a ghost haunting his own life, his military duffel bag slung over one shoulder, containing everything he owned in the world. 4 months out of Walter Reed Medical Center, 3 months since his medical discharge, and still the sound of his own footsteps on pavement made him flinch. The town sprawled before him like a mirage of faded dreams, weathered storefronts with sun-bleached signs, pickup trucks rusted by desert winds, and that peculiar silence that only exists in places where hope goes to die. Marcus had chosen this place precisely because it was nowhere, because nobody here would know. Staff Sergeant Chen, who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, who'd carried his wounded squad leader 2 miles through enemy territory, who'd been recommended for a Bronze Star before the explosion that ended everything. Here he was just another drifter with $2,300 in disability pay, burning a hole in his pocket and nowhere else to go. The heat made his left leg ache where the shrapnel still lived beneath the skin. Each step a reminder of that October morning when his Humvee hit an IED outside Kandahar. But it was not the physical pain that kept him walking aimlessly through this forgotten town. It was the silence inside his head, that he couldn't seem to fill, the absence of purpose that felt heavier than any gear he'd ever carried. Marcus paused outside Ruby's Diner, its neon sign flickering weakly in the afternoon glare. Through the fly-specked window, he could see maybe 6 customers scattered across red vinyl booths, their conversations muffled by thick glass and his own isolation. A bell above the door chimed as he entered, and for a moment every face turned toward him with that mixture of curiosity and wariness that small towns reserved for strangers. "Seat yourself, honey," called a waitress with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen too much. Her name tag read Dorothy, and she moved between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been serving coffee and dreams for decades. Marcus chose a corner booth where he could see both the door and the window, old habits dying hard. The menu was laminated and sticky, offering the kind of comfort food that promised to fill stomachs but not souls. He ordered black coffee and a burger, more because he needed to eat than because he was hungry. That's when he saw her. She sat 3 booths away, her back to the window, completely absorbed in something on the table before her. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, with long, dark hair that caught the afternoon light, filtering through the dusty glass. But it was not her youth or beauty that stopped Marcus, mid-sip of his coffee. It was the intense concentration on her face, the way her finger moved across the table's surface with deliberate, purposeful strokes. At first, he thought she was cleaning the table, maybe working there. But as his eyes adjusted and he leaned slightly forward, he realized she was drawing. Her finger traced patterns in the thin layer of dust that had settled on the formica surface, creating lines and shadows with nothing but pressure and imagination. Marcus found himself unable to look away. There was something hypnotic about her movements, something pure about the way she worked with such simple tools. Dust and finger and fierce determination. Other diners seemed oblivious to her presence, but Marcus was transfixed. The waitress, Dorothy, appeared beside his table with his burger. "That's Eleanor," she said quietly, following his gaze. "Been coming in here for about 2 years now, sweet girl. Can't hear a word we say, but Lord can she draw." "Deaf?" Marcus asked, the word coming out rougher than he intended. Dorothy nodded, setting down his plate. "Born that way, lives with her aunt over on Cedar Street. Works mornings at the grocery store. Afternoons she comes here and draws. Never causes any trouble, always leaves a tip even though she just orders water." Marcus watched as Elena's finger continued its dance across the dusty surface. Even from his distance, he could make out the emerging shapes, what looked like a face, though he couldn't tell whose. Her expression was one of complete absorption, as if the entire world had narrowed down to that small rectangle of dust and the image taking shape beneath her touch. "She's good," Marcus said, more to himself than to Dorothy. "Better than good. Girl's got a gift. Shame she can't afford proper supplies or lessons or—" Dorothy's voice trailed off with the kind of resignation that comes from watching dreams wither in desert towns. As if sensing his attention, Eleanor suddenly looked up. Their eyes met across the diner, and for a moment time seemed suspended. Her dark eyes held his gaze without embarrassment or shyness, studying his face with the same intensity she'd brought to her drawing. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not the practiced smile of politeness, but something genuine and curious. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks and quickly looked down at his plate. When he glanced up again, Eleanor had returned to her work, but something had shifted in the atmosphere of the diner. He could feel her presence more acutely now, as if that brief moment of connection had tuned him to a frequency he hadn't known existed. He finished his meal in silence, paid his check, and left Dorothy a generous tip. As he reached the door, he risked one more look back at Elena. She was still drawing, still lost in her art, but there was something different about her posture now, a slight tilt to her head that suggested awareness of his departure. Outside, the desert heat hit him like a physical blow, but Marcus barely noticed. For the first time in months, he felt something other than numbness. It wasn't hope exactly, he wasn't ready for that yet, but it was interest. It was the recognition that perhaps this forgotten town held more than just a place to hide from his past. 3 days passed before Marcus returned to Ruby's diner, though not for lack of wanting. He'd walked past it twice, slowing his pace each time to peer through the windows, but Elena hadn't been there. On the 3rd day, desperation finally overcame his pride. He needed to see her again, needed to understand why a stranger's silent presence had managed to crack something open inside his chest that he'd kept sealed shut for months. The bell chimed his arrival at 2:47 p.m., and Dorothy looked up from wiping down the counter with a knowing smile. "She's here," she said simply, nodding toward the same booth by the window. Elena sat in exactly the same position as before, her dark hair falling like a curtain as she bent over the table's surface. But this time Marcus approached slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs with an intensity that reminded him of pre-mission nerves. He'd faced enemy fire with more composure than he felt walking across this small-town diner floor. When he was close enough to see her work clearly, Marcus stopped breathing. There, rendered in dust with impossible precision, was his own face. Not just his face, but his expression from 3 days ago. The carefully controlled mask he wore to hide his pain, the 1,000-yard stare that marked him as a soldier, the slight tightness around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and memories he couldn't outrun. She had captured not just his features, but his soul's geography, mapping the terrain of his hurt with nothing but her finger and an artist's intuition. Elena must have sensed his presence because she looked up, and when she saw his face, the real one hovering above its dusty twin, her eyes widened in surprise that quickly melted into something warmer. She gestured to the empty seat across from her, a question in her raised eyebrows. Marcus slid into the booth, his eyes moving between Elena's face and the portrait she'd created. Up close, the detail was even more breathtaking. She had somehow managed to capture the exact curve of his jawline, the specific way his hair fell across his forehead, even the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd almost forgotten. "How?" he asked, then immediately felt foolish. She couldn't hear his question, couldn't hear anything at all, but Elena smiled and pointed to her eyes, then to his face, then to the portrait. The message was clear: "I see you." From her purse, she pulled out a small notebook and pen, the pages worn soft from constant use. She wrote quickly, her handwriting flowing and elegant. "You looked sad." I wanted to remember what sadness looks like on a soldier's face. Marcus stared at the words, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical vulnerability. In combat, you learn to read faces for signs of danger, deception, fear. But Eleanor had read his face for something else entirely, for the story written in the lines of exhaustion, the weight of memories in the set of his shoulders. He took the pen from her and wrote beneath her words, "How did you know I was a soldier?" Elena's response came quickly. "The way you sit, the way you watch doors, the way you carry invisible weight. My uncle was Army, Korea. He had the same look. He died 2 years ago, Agent Orange." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the brotherhood of loss that connected all military families. He wrote, "I'm sorry." Elena nodded, then wrote, "He would have liked you." He said the saddest soldiers were often the best ones. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the dust portrait between them like a bridge spanning the gulf between sound and silence, between her world and his. Marcus watched as Elena began to add to the portrait, her finger moving with deliberate strokes around his drawn face. Slowly, he realized she was drawing a scene, his portrait at the center, but surrounded by other figures. Soldiers in various poses, some standing at attention, others kneeling, all facing toward his central image. It was like watching a memorial take shape, a tribute rendered in dust and devotion. "Why?" Marcus whispered, forgetting again that she couldn't hear him. Elena looked up and saw the question in his eyes. She wrote in her notebook, "Because someone should witness, someone should remember, even if it's just in dust." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For months he'd felt invisible, forgotten by a country that had moved on while he remained stuck in moments of trauma and loss. But here was this young woman, this deaf artist, saying that his pain mattered enough to be recorded, even in something as temporary as dust on a diner table. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself drawn to Ruby's diner every afternoon, like iron filings to a magnet. What began as curiosity had transformed into something deeper, a need to witness Elena's quiet artistry, to be seen by someone who understood the weight of carrying silent burdens. Their communication evolved beyond the notebook. Elena taught Marcus basic sign language, her hands patient and graceful as she shaped words in the air between them. Marcus proved a quick student, his military-trained mind adapting to this new form of communication with surprising ease. Elena told him about her dreams through careful sketches in her notebook, Images of art galleries, of her work displayed on clean white walls, of people stopping to study her creations. She showed him drawings of houses she'd never lived in, gardens she'd never tended, children she'd never heard laugh but imagined might exist someday. But it was Elena's living situation that gradually began to consume Marcus's thoughts. Through their conversations, he learned that she shared a cramped two-bedroom apartment with her Aunt Rosa, who worked double shifts at the textile factory to make ends meet. Elena slept on a pull-out couch in the living room, her art supplies, what few she had, stored in a shoebox under the coffee table. The injustice of it burned in Marcus's chest. Here was someone with genuine talent, someone who could create magic from dust and determination, living in conditions that would have broken a lesser spirit. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Elena had been working on an elaborate dust portrait when a group of teenagers burst through the diner's front door. They were loud, careless, their laughter sharp with cruelty. One of them, a boy with acne scars and mean eyes, noticed Elena's artwork first. "Look at the freak," he said loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "Playing in the dirt like a little kid." The boy approached her table. "Hey, dummy!" he shouted directly at Elena's bent head. "Dummy, I'm talking to you!" Elena looked up, confused by the sudden shadow falling across her work. When she saw the hostile faces surrounding her table, her expression shifted from confusion to fear. "Can't hear us, can you?" the boy continued. "That's because you're defective. Broken." Marcus was halfway out of his booth before his conscious mind caught up with his body. The familiar surge of protective rage flooded his system, coupled with something new, a fierce, personal need to shield Elena from harm. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice carrying authority. The teenagers turned toward him, their bravado faltering when they saw his size, the controlled violence in his posture. "She is my business," Marcus said quietly. "And you're going to apologize to her and leave, now." They left with manufactured casualness, but Marcus could see the relief in their quick exit. Eleanor wrote in her notebook, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Marcus wrote back. "Why? Because you matter, because your art matters, because nobody should have to face cruelty alone." Elena reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you," she wrote with her free hand. "No one has ever defended me before." That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about Elena's words. The thought ate at him like acid. Elena needed more than protection from bullies. She needed a space where her art could flourish, where she could create without fear. She needed a home that was truly hers. The next afternoon, Marcus arrived at Ruby's diner with a notebook of his own. "I want to ask you something important," Marcus wrote. "What if you didn't have to draw in dust? What if you had a real studio with proper supplies, with space to create whatever you wanted?" Elena's eyes widened. "That's just a dream. Dreams don't come true for people like me." "What if they could?" Marcus wrote back. "What if someone wanted to make that happen for you?" He took a deep breath and wrote the words that would change both their lives. "I want to build you a house, a real house, with a studio where you can make art, where you can be safe and create and never have to hide your talent again. Why would you do that for me? Because you saw me when I was invisible, because your art saved something in me that I thought was broken forever, because you deserve a place in this world where you can be everything you're meant to be." Elena read his words twice. Then she wrote her response. "Yes, but not just a house for me, a home for us. If you want that too." "Yes," he wrote back, "a home for us." The next 2 months transformed Marcus completely. He found the perfect lot, 2 acres of desert land with mountain views. Elena threw herself into planning with the same intensity she brought to her art, sketching room layouts and imagining how light would move through spaces they hadn't yet built. Word of their project spread through Copper Ridge. Dorothy organized a fundraiser. Tom Rodriguez from the lumberyard offered materials at cost, but the most unexpected support came from a phone call. "Sergeant Chen, this is Master Sergeant Pete Kowalski. I served with your unit commander. I hear you're building something in Arizona. Word gets around the veteran community. We want to help. Got about 40 guys from various units who want to participate." The following weekend, Marcus watched in amazement as 43 veterans from across the Southwest arrived to help build Elena's house. They came with tools, materials, and stories about how Marcus's actions in Afghanistan had affected their lives. "You think you came home broken," said Sergeant Major Crawford. "But you came home exactly who you always were, someone who protects people who need protecting. This house is just another mission, Chen." Elena watched the construction with wonder, sketching constantly. Through patient translation from veterans who knew sign language, she learned their stories about battles and loss, about struggling to find purpose in civilian life. "You gave Marcus something to fight for again," Sergeant Thompson signed to Eleanor. "You brought him back." "He brought me back too," Eleanor wrote. "I was disappearing in a different way." By Sunday evening, the frame stood complete. As the volunteers prepared to leave, they gathered for what Crawford called the ceremony. "Elena," Crawford said, speaking slowly so she could read his lips, "this house is being built by warriors who understand the value of protecting something precious." Then, as the sun set, 43 veterans sang "Amazing Grace," their voices carrying across the desert air. Elena couldn't hear the melody, but she felt the vibration through her feet, saw the emotion on their faces. Crawford approached Elena with a wooden box containing professional art supplies and a leather-bound sketchbook. Inside were drawings made by each veteran, a collection of art made by warrior hands as tribute to the deaf girl who had saved one of their own. "Why would you do this for me?" Elena wrote. "Because you brought our brother back to life, because your art matters. Because sometimes warriors fight not to destroy, but to build." The house was completed on a December morning. Marcus stood in Elena's studio doorway, watching her arrange supplies on custom shelves. Northern light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating her first real painting, a portrait of Marcus, but not as the broken soldier from the diner. This Marcus had hope in his eyes. The house had become a symbol for Copper Ridge. Visitors came regularly, and many commissioned Elena's work. Her reputation grew beyond their small town, carried by the veterans who spread word of her talent. Then came the letter that changed everything. Marcus found Elena staring at official letterhead, Smithsonian Institution, National Museum of American History. A military blogger had written about Elena's story. The post went viral, reaching millions. Now the Smithsonian wanted to feature Elena's work in an exhibition about art, healing, and military experience. "They want 5 of my paintings in Washington, D.C., Elena wrote, her handwriting shaky with excitement and terror. "You're scared," Marcus observed. "What if I'm not good enough? You're an artist who sees souls in faces, who creates beauty from nothing, who saved a broken soldier. Your art belongs in the Smithsonian because you belong in the world." The exhibition opened Memorial Day weekend. The museum was crowded with visitors, reporters, and military families. Elena's 5 paintings hung in a place of honor. But the real surprise came when they entered the exhibition hall. Standing before her paintings were more than 400 people in military dress uniforms, not just the original 43 veterans, but soldiers from across the country who had heard their story. When Eleanor realized what was happening, she covered her face and wept. Marcus held her as 400 voices rose in perfect harmony, a song of honor for the girl who had seen humanity in a wounded soldier and built a home from that vision. The song echoed through the Smithsonian's halls, carrying their story to anyone within reach. It was about seeing and being seen, about building beauty from wreckage, about one person changing the world by recognizing another's worth. When the music ended, the silence was full of respect, love, and recognition that the most powerful stories begin with the smallest gestures. A portrait drawn in dust, a hand extended in friendship, the decision to build something lasting from something ephemeral. They had started as two invisible people in a forgotten town. Now they stood in America's most important museum, their love story preserved where the nation's greatest stories were told. But the real magic wasn't the fame. It was that somewhere in Arizona, in a house built by loving hands, there was a studio where a young artist could create without fear, where her gifts were celebrated, where she was seen and loved exactly as she was. The story had begun with dust and ended with love, lasting, deep, and beautiful enough to inspire 400 warriors to sing.